Assalamu alaikum and peace. This is Imam Malik Mujahid, and you're watching Muslim Network TV on Galaxy 19 satellite, Amazon Fire TV, Roku, and Apple TV. And of course, on our own website, muslimnetwork.tv. I came to know how Iranians feel about the United States in 1977 when I was visiting the US for the first time. Iranian students were demonstrating all around the country against the Shah of Iran, looking for democracy, praying on the streets of America, which probably America has never seen before. It has been 40 years since the Iranian Revolution, but conflict between USA and Iran continues. Just yesterday, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo warned that United States will put sanctions on any individual and entity that assist Iran's weapon program. And that came at the heel that sanctions, UN sanctions, or Iran's arm industry were lifted by the United Nations. Last month, the United States unilaterally reimposed several sanctions on Tehran. So this is 40 years, and we'll go through it. It is not easy to compress all of that within an hour, but we will try to do our best because we have an expert who was marching on the streets of America in those days for democracy in Iran. Then he became the diplomat of Iran for a very long period of time, and currently in the United States serving as visiting professor. Please welcome Ambassador Seyed Hossein Mousavian.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam. Ambassador Seyed Hossein Mousavian is a visiting research scholar at the Princeton University, at its Woodrow Wilson School of Public International Affairs since 2009. He has served in different positions in the Iranian diplomatic corps. So, Ambassador, when was the last time you visited Iran?
I just came back from Tehran at the end of September. I was in Tehran for 3-4 months.
Oh, did you visit your birth city of Kashan also?
Yes, definitely. Whenever I'm in Iran, definitely, at least I spend 50% of my time in my hometown because my parents, they are very old and I try to enjoy staying with them as much as I can.
Wow. So your parents are still in Kashan?
Yes.
So Kashan is some sort of a historic city, isn't it?
With 7,000 years of history. If you visit Louvre Museum in Paris, you would see the ancient pieces of Kashan, which is for 7,000 years.
So is that the oldest type of archaeological spots in Iran? Iran seems to be a very old civilization.
This is the oldest we have, at least at the big museums worldwide, which is Louvre in Paris, for 7,000 years of civilization and history in Iran. And the many pieces are from Kashan, which shows that time the civilization has started from Kashan.
Mm-hmm. So tell us, was there any mention of Iran in the United States debates between presidential candidates?
Yes, I think this is an issue which Iranian people, they are following. Presidential election in the US is widely covered in Iranian media, and the public opinion, they pay attention since they are under pressures and sanctions by the US. They are following the news, the developments in the US in the election to see whether there would be a better president or not.
So So it's not just the Iranian government, but it's in the popular media and popular discourse. American presidential elections are also there.
Yes, a lot.
So are there some cartoons and comics about our elections?
Cartoons are more about the behavior and statements of President Trump, because he has already given a lot of reason worldwide, not only in Iran. You would see in European media a lot of cartoons making jokes about his statements, behaviors, decisions, and definitely you would find in Iranian media a lot.
Well, our comedians are having fun about our presidential elections. Do you have a genre of comedians who laugh at the Iranian leadership as well as the U.S. leadership, or there is
Yes,
only at the
yes, we
U.S.
do have. Yes, we do have. I mean, in Iran, we have thousands of papers, magazines, and I would say they are 50-50 between the moderates and conservatives. And if you have been able to follow the trend of Iranian media after revolution, uh, always both medias affiliated to moderates or conservatives, they have always been critical of the system, whether the government or parliament. There have been always very, very active debate criticizing the other party, like Democrats and Republicans you see in the US. And frankly speaking, since I have been living in the US since 2009. I spent my undergrad at Sacramento State University in California. I can tell you the domestic situation of Iran and the US, they are very much mirror image of each other.
Interesting. Well, does anybody in America know about it?
I don't believe so. I mean, Americans, unfortunately, they have zero information about the reality of Iran because they are dependent, very much dependent on the media, and media, they have always told uh, lies about Iran. And if you interview any American which has visited Iran during last 40 years, you would find thousands of Americans which they have visited Iran as a tourist. I promise you, every visitor, American visitor, would tell you the Iran they saw is completely different with the Iran presented by the US media and the US politicians.
Well, that is something probably uh, because those people who visit, they don't write, or they are just enjoying Iranian cuisine and carpets, and instead of being ambassador of what people can tell each other about.
The tourists, the visitors, normally they go, they visit the different cities, and they spend their time more with the nation, with the people. Therefore, they can have a better understanding about the culture, civilization, about the hospitalities of Iranian, and about the political views of the Iranians.
Is it legal for Americans to go to Iran?
Yes, we have normally American tourists, they are going to Iran. They have never been in problem because there is no issue about American people. Iranians, either the government or the nation, they have no problem with American people. The problem is with the American policies, I mean, with the state, with the government.
Tell us, what was that? President Trump says that Obama gave billions of US dollar in cash to Iran. What was that about?
The US didn't give $1 to Iran. The US.
Oh, wait a minute. You're saying US did not give even $1 to Iran?
even $1 US dollars. The money did not belong to the US. The money was blockaded by the US after revolution. It was Iranian money, it was belonged to Iranians, which the US for 35 years illegally blocked. It was Iranian money, it was not the US money.
So Obama did give money, but you're saying it was the Iranian money which Obama released.
No, there was a dispute. There has been a dispute for 30 years in international court. Iranians, they had a claim on the table of international court to get their money back because Iranians, they paid before revolution for American weapons. And right after revolution, Iranians actually, they were completely sanctioned from American weapons, but the Americans did not return the money back. They neither gave the weapons nor the money back. Therefore, this was their debt. And there was a case in international court against them. And this was not just the whole issue. During the last 40 years, continuously they had lost to Iran in the court, and they had to pay, but they were paying gradually, case by case, because it has been many contracts, many agreements for 37 years before the revolution between Iran and the US. And the US always lost every case. But they, during the nuclear talks, they decided to go for resolving the remaining financial dispute in the Hague. They decided to negotiate and resolve it peacefully, because they were already on the agreement to resolve the nuclear crisis through diplomacy and in a way of peaceful settlement. They decided to have the same for the remaining financial debt the US had with Iran, which was about 1.7 billion. And they agreed, and that's why the US accepted to return Iranian money back after 35 years.
So it was $1.7 billion.
Yes.
So why then, instead of transferring through bank, it was loaded in a plane which landed there in Iran?
Because Americans, they have sanctioned Iranian banks, and they have blocked practically any banking transaction between not only the American banks, but European banks, other banks with Iran. Since there was no banking relations, it was American decision, it was not Iranian will. And they had no other option to pay it cash.
Interesting. That's a very, is there any bigger transfer of cash through airline in the human history?
I really don't know. I have never studied Imam, whether there has been a bigger or not, but it could be easily transferred through a bank, a European bank, not even an American bank, but the US couldn't do it because of its own exterritorial sanctions against European banks and entities and companies.
So what are the current sanctions which Iran faces?
Actually, Iran has been facing the US pressure coercion policy since Revolution 1979. And as everybody knows,
revolution.
Yes, right after revolution. This is not something new. Before revolution, Iran was faced with dictatorship of Shah and the US dominance. The US completely dominated Iran before revolution. And actually the revolution was against foreign dominance and dictatorship. After revolution, exactly, the US had problem with both narratives and root causes of this revolution, because the US strategy was supporting the dictators in the region, still is supporting the dictator. The US declared policy is supporting human rights, democracy, But the US practical policy during last 4, 5, 6 decades in the Middle East is supporting the dictators, whether Shah of Iran or Mubarak in Egypt or MBS of Saudi Arabia. It doesn't matter, they are only supported dictators. They really don't like democracies. That's why this was one of the big root causes of the US hostility with Iran after revolution, because they didn't like elections, democracy. They just like some leaders to be completely in the hand and in the court of the US. And the second actually issue was that since Iran was not ready to be dominated by any foreign powers, and overwhelming majority of Middle Eastern countries, they were dominated by the US. The US was not ready to let Iran go free. And that's why, because Iranian foreign policy after revolution was based on neither East nor West. It means Iran would not be dominated neither by Eastern powers like Russia or Eastern powers like Britain or US. This has been the real causes of US hostilities during the last 40 years. And that's why the US started sanctioning Iran right after revolution and increased sanctions each year during every US president, with no exception, whether Republicans or Democrats. There was only one difference, and it was during President Obama's second term, when the US president decided to forego regime change in Iran, because regime change has been continuously the US policy after revolution. Obama decided in his second term with John Kerry, decided to forego regime change policy and to start negotiation with no condition and precondition, and to respect Iran. After this policy, which happened practically for the first time after 35 years of Iran-US hostilities, Iran and the US negotiated about 2 years on the most complicated issue between the two countries, which was nuclear. And surprisingly to the world, to the Iranians, to the Americans, they could agree on a deal called the Iranian nuclear deal, JCPOA. And the difference, the problem, the conflict on the nuclear was resolved through diplomacy. But here is what practically has shifted recently Iranian decision on relation with the West, because the nuclear deal was the first agreement negotiated between Iran and the US, Iran and Europe, and Iran and the world powers, including China and Russia. And the United Nations Security Council adopted a resolution supporting the deal. The International Atomic Energy Agency adopted a resolution supporting the deal. Therefore, it was an international agreement, multilateral agreement, although the Iran and the US direct negotiations played the key role to reach this agreement. For 3 years, from 2015 to 2018, Iran fully complied with the deal with zero failure. You would see 16 reports by International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, confirming the full compliance of Iran. And you would be surprised to hear the fact that Iran was the only member of this agreement which fully implied the deal. Neither the US, even during President Obama, because of the primary sanctions, nor Europeans, because they were afraid of US primary sanctions, and nor even Chinese or Russians. None of them implemented the deal correctly, precisely, and completely. However, the first agreement achieved, it was international agreement. The US signed, the international powers they signed, Iran fully implemented for 3 years. President Trump came to power and violated the UN resolution, violated the JCPOA, the nuclear deal, and destroyed the deal and imposed the most comprehensive sanctions during the history of Iran-US relations. Therefore, that's why
we will take a short break here, and we'll be right back after these messages.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Adam. You remember me? I appeared in so many episodes that Sound Vision has put on the market. No matter what. Hey, what's happening? Hey, oh, sorry. Lockdown is what it is. Well, continuing here. In this lockdown, Sound Vision never stops thinking about you, the viewer. We'll have to get back into production again, online and inline. Everybody in their own space, even me. Although I'm stuck with Lanisa.
Salam! Salam! Salam!
I know, you were shocked too. Well, let me continue. This is what I was going to say. Salam! 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 Cut! Finally, I get my own screen time again. Thank God. And so we invested in new equipment to bring you even better production with new songs and new singers and animations. Well, here are a few clips. And Sound Vision has brought all this into your home, making Islamic values and teachings easy. And if you know me, Adam, a multi-talented actor, well, sometimes I'm an actor and the reporter and the... Oh, that's enough. Let's move on to the next section. Well, you can watch these new episodes on our new app at www.adamsworldapp.com. We have previews happening every day on Muslim Network TV. Sound Vision has been serving generations, moving and changing with the times. We are all faithfully connected. That is a huge blessing. Your donation helps keep these programs available now and into the future. We take this job of helping tomorrow's Muslims today seriously, and you should too. Today, we need your help. Children absorb and learn from everything they encounter. Make that wholesome, positive, grounded in our faith. Together, we can accomplish our goal of raising better Muslims better neighbors, and better citizens. Please donate generously.
It's an investment in our future.
To finish, let me tell you, there are new scripts of my new mission. And it is something that I enjoy talking about. My new mission is space. Houston, we do not have a problem. Salam, see you soon. Me too.
Welcome back to Muslim Network TV. This is Imam Malik Mujahid. I'm talking with Ambassador Seyed Hossein Mousavian. You were mentioning that there was a nuclear deal, was more than a nuclear deal. Iran fully complied. Other nations did not comply. So Obama returned $1.7 billion, but rest of the sanctions were still in place when President Trump came into power, or some sanctions were lifted?
See, what I said when the nuclear agreed in 2015, the other world powers, signatories of the deal, they could not implement the deal completely precisely because of the US primary sanctions. The nuclear related sanctions, they were removed based on this deal, but the US primary sanctions was problem. That's why the deal was working about 50%, 40%, not completely, but Iran fully complied.
So the President Trump, with the sanction which he has implemented, you're saying those sanctions are worse than any sanction in the last 40 years of US history?
President Trump imposed very strongly the primary sanctions. President Trump reinstalled the nuclear-related sanctions, and President Trump imposed unprecedented sanctions beyond nuclear sanctions, beyond primary sanctions.
What does primary sanction means? What does primary
sanctions? All sanctions before nuclear deal. I mean, all sanctions after revolution from 1980 to 2015. Iranian, it was about, for example, investing on Iranian oil industry, petrochemical industry, all these issues during different US administrations. Every administration had some new sanctions on Iran.
Okay.
However, President Trump imposed sanctions beyond primary sanctions, beyond nuclear-related sanctions, like sanctioning the Iranian supreme leader, like sanctioning the Iranian foreign minister, like sanctioning hundreds of Iranian personalities, institutions, entities, and even designating Revolutionary Guard of Iran, which is official military of Iran, as terrorist organization, you know. That's why Iran has been punished by President Trump for full compliance with the UN Resolution 2231 implementing the nuclear deal. And then Iranians understood, if there is a deal, if there is an agreement, if Iran fully complies, then Iran would be rewarded with the most comprehensive sanctions and pressures. This is the US. That's why they started to become completely disappointed from the US and Europe and the Western countries. And they have started a big shift toward the Eastern blocs, China, Russia, India, and so on.
Well, you know, that shift which you have written about also, isn't that a shift which Iran took about 40 years ago when the pro-America Shah of Iran lost and Iranian revolution came into being? So that shift was already in the making. I mean, why Iran waited 40 years? I think Iran was making those shifts.
No, Imam, the reality is this, that from 1953, which the US and UK managed a coup against democratically elected Prime Minister of Iran, Mossadegh, in 1953, and removed a democratically elected government and installed a dictator Shah in 1953. From 1953 to 1979, Iran was completely in the court of US, dominated by the US and the West. Revolution when happened, the theory of revolution was neither East nor West. From 1980 to 2018, Iran tried to keep a balance in relation with the West and the East. That's why you would see after 2015 nuclear deal agreed, Iran signed almost equal amount of economic agreement, trade agreement with the Western countries, including Europeans and even Americans, with the Eastern countries. If, let's say, $400 billion of contract was signed, it was almost 50-50 between West and East. Iran decided to buy 100 plane from Boeing, 100 plane from Airbus to keep a balance between European and American. And then Iran signed some big contracts with China and huge contracts with Italy, France, with Total, Eni, Peugeot, you know, all these, even Volkswagen, all of them. I mean, it was really a balance. But in 2018, when President Trump withdrew the deal and violated the US agreement with Iran, violated the IAEA resolution, violated the United Nations Security Council resolution, and rewarded Iran with the most comprehensive sanctions just because Iran fully complied with the deal, then Iran and Europeans also, they could not resist the US pressures. I mean, when President Trump withdrew from the deal, Europeans practically stopped every business with Iran. Then Iran understood, even if there is a deal, if the US withdraw, and even if Europeans, they support the deal, practically Europeans are helpless. They cannot do anything because of the US sanctions.
So you're saying that that caused a major shift, and instead of West, it is aligning with Russia and China.
Iran has started to negotiating long-term agreement, 25 years comprehensive partnership agreement with China. And Iran has decided to renew and to strengthen 20 years cooperation agreement between Iran and Russia. And I believe they are not going to wait anymore for the Western countries, whether they would be ready to make business with Iran or not. They have decided to go first, totally, to follow the self-sufficiency strategy, to become as much as they can self-sufficient.
Let's talk a little bit about the Iranian relationship with the Sunni world. I could have called Muslim world, but let's talk about that a little bit. You know, Iran fought against a dictator, Shah of Iran. That's what revolution is all about. But it ended up supporting a brutal dictator, Assad, in Syria. And it is said that Assad, instead of him being some sort of a Shia, there are some theological reasoning behind Iranian support for Assad. That was insight given to me by a Shia scholar in Chicago when I told him why Sunnis and Shia cannot say that democracy prevails, whatever people elect. So what about some Shia scholars and Sunni scholars in America signing this, that they need to have dialogue and allow people to elect? And he says, no, Iranian Syrian situation is very different there, and he gave some reasoning. So is there some theological thing involved in Iranian support for Assad?
Look, Iranians, Shia and Sunnis, they have lived for centuries together in this region. The conflict today is more because of political rivalries between some, especially between Saudi Arabia and Iran, not all Sunni countries. One. Second, as you know, we have four major sects in Sunni world: Malikis, Shafi'is, Hanafis. And I can tell you very sincerely, Iranians as a Shia, they have never had problem with any four major school of thought of Sunnis, but they have had always problem with Wahhabism. Therefore, this is the second issue. The third issue is that because Saudi Arabia has allied itself with the US and with Israel to overthrow Iranian system, this has really empowered the hostility conflict between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And many people, they think this is about Iran and Sunni war, which is not. About Assad, the issue is a little bit different. You need to have a correct understanding from the history. When Saddam invaded Iran, Saudi Arabia, all Arab countries in the Persian Gulf, they supported Saddam's invasion of Iran. They paid tens of billions of dollars to Saddam to support the invasion of Saddam, to bring Iran in total disintegration. Syria was perhaps one of the two Arab countries only. They supported Iran against Saddam invasion. Iranians could never forget that when they were invaded by Saddam, supported by the US, Europe, Russia, all of them, Arabs, Syria stood by Iran against the invasion of Saddam. 8 years war. Iranians, they could never forget. Second, there was a strategic agreement between Syria and Iran before Bashar Assad, Hafez Assad, again renewed during Bashar, that if there is an aggression by foreign powers or interference by foreign powers, they would support each other. This is number two. Number three, the Iranian narrative supporting Saddam is completely different, because even if you believe Bashar is dictator, was dictator and is dictator, the Arab world normally...
Even if you believe, listen,
yes.
Do you have a doubt that he was
No, I don't say it is a democratic system, never. But my issue is that many Arab worlds are ruled by dictators. Therefore, dictatorship in the Arab world normally is a very normal issue. Many Arab countries are ruled by dictators, even today.
But isn't this the people
No, hold on.
Syria who started demonstrating peacefully, asking for election and
yes,
right to vote?
Yes, this is the right of the people. Assad made a big mistake to confront them with violence. It was a big mistake, no doubt about it. But the issue was that based on what the former Prime Minister of Qatar publicly in an interview with the US TV publicly said that Qatar, US, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey, they were united and they recruited tens of thousands of foreign terrorists, and they exported to Syria to bring a regime change. This is very different. If you have some people demonstrating either in the streets of Tehran or Damascus, you should never treat them with violence. And everyone who treats them with violence should be condemned, no doubt about it. But the issue from the Iranian point of view was far, far, far beyond a normal demonstration, because they saw 80,000 foreign citizens exported by Turkey, Saudi Arabia, US, and Qatar and Emirate to enter a country, independent country, to bring regime change. It was a complete foreign interference to bring a regime change. What Iran stood against was exactly to fight the ISIS, Al-Qaeda in Syria and in Iraq, to prevent regime change in Baghdad and Damascus. This is, I'm explaining the Iranian narrative, you know. You may don't agree. This is another issue. But the Iranian narrative and policy was to support the Baghdad government, Damascus government, against the terrorists which have occupied their land, and they were going to bring regime change in both in Syria and Baghdad, supported by foreign countries, weapon and money. It is completely now known how much Saudi Arabia, Turkey, the US supported by money, weapons to bring regime change. And it was completely clear that the ISIS, Al-Qaeda, they occupied 40%, 50%, 60% of the territories of Iraq and Syria, and their objective was to bring regime change. And Iran stood against this policy and is this issue. Whether, I'm sure, if there has not been foreign interference, if there has not been the entrance of tens of thousands of foreign terrorists to a country like Syria or Iraq, Iran would never send his troops to Iraq to fight ISIS, because it was really Iranians who stood by Iraqi army to fight ISIS, cleaned Iraq from the ISIS. And then Iran would have never interfered in Syria, because it was not interference. Iran was invited by the government of Syria and Iraq to come to help them to free their territory from terrorists.
Well, inviting people to free territory has been a narrative of a lot of Western nations as well. So who was Qasem Soleimani, and what was he doing in Syria, and why did US killed him?
Actually, Iran has a force called Quds forces. And the mandate and the duty of this force is exactly like CENTCOM, the US forces. It is for the operation, CENTCOM is for the operation of the military operation of the US outside the borders of the United States, in the Middle East and Persian Gulf and so. Quds forces is the counterpart of CENTCOM, US CENTCOM. This is one. Qasem Soleimani was the commander of Quds forces, like the commander of CENTCOM. The commander of CENTCOM, 90% of his time is in the Middle East, in different countries, not in the US. And Qasem Soleimani was the commander of Quds forces. The governments of Iraq and Syria both officially requested Iran to support them. Iraq officially requested the US to support, because the US also was there to fight ISIS and Al-Qaeda. This was the mandate of US forces only because of the Iraqi invitation. And the Iraqi invitation was exactly the same for Iranians to support them against ISIS. And it was the same invitation from Damascus. That's why Qasem Soleimani had to spend many times, a majority of his time or part of his time, in these two countries in the fight against ISIS. The US killed him.
Yes.
Because there is a big issue between Iran and the US. Iranians, they say, you Americans, what are you doing 5, 6, 7,000 miles out of your country in our region? This is our region. We are living in this region. ISIS was at our border. It was not at your border. Iraq has 1,200 kilometers of common border with Iran. And if Iranians and Iraqis, they are going to fight, they have legitimate reasons. But why you are in this region? This is the Iranian complaint, and exactly the US has the same complaint. They say, what are you doing in Iraq and Syria? Therefore, they have been challenging each other regionally for 40 years. It has not been new. But after ISIS was defeated in Syria and in Iraq, and everybody understood and recognized the Revolutionary Guard of Iran played a major role defeating the terrorists in Iraqi land and Syrian land. Unfortunately, the US assassinated Qasem Soleimani.
So now you give it in a strategic perspective. There is a relationship between Assad and Iran has to come, treaty obligation to come and help. I don't think a whole lot of world, especially the Muslim world, buy into that argument. They see is Iranian revolution trying to export itself through many, many means. And this is one of the means. And so is there as a person who have not much successfully brought Shias and Sunnis in America on one table to discuss the issues. And so we have peace among ourselves here. And if possible, there's a lot of people from those countries who are in the United States. They have some influence that this, so to me, it's not a narrative. It is a conflict which exists place in place. I mean, there are countries like Indonesia and Mali. There used to be no Shias there historically, but Iran has taken that. I mean, they have full right. I don't disagree with their rights in that. Do you see any possibility, not talking about the Iran and Saudi conflict, that Shias and Sunnis can live peacefully on the basis of the principle lakum dinukum waliya din, that you practice your faith and I practice my faith? What are the possibility of Shias and Sunni developing a better relationship, and considering these conflicts between the countries, conflict between the countries, not between the faith people?
No, I fully agree with you. I believe there should be and it can be a peaceful living between Sunnis and Shias, not only between Sunni and Shia. I believe we need a broader interfaith dialogue between Muslims with Christians and even with Jews in order to have a peace between Muslims, Christians, Jews. Definitely the priority should be between Muslims and Muslims, no doubt about it. But I think the religious leaders, they should take initiative. The leaders of Al-Azhar in Egypt, as maybe the most important religious Sunni institution in Sunni world, and the religious schools of Najaf, led by Ayatollah Sistani, and the religious schools of Qom, led by many grand ayatollahs, Shia grand ayatollahs. I think this should be initiated by religious leaders, muftis and Maraji' Taqlid of Shia, in order to bring the scholars of Sunni and Shia to sit together, because Sunni and Shia, if they have differences, they have 90% commons. From the God to Prophet Muhammad to Quran, all of them, they are the major issues, they have commons. This is one. Second, I agree with you that many in Sunni worlds, they disagree with Iranian regional policies. I fully agree with you. But at the end, the recent poll held by Sunni world shows that the Arab public opinion, they believe the US is the major threat first and Israel is the second one. And this is very important to recognize the reality of thinking in the Arab world, which they are mostly Sunnis. Third, with a big regret, I would say the Arab League, the Arab leaders, they have been, they are practically, they have broken apart. Look what they did when Netanyahu decided to announce Jerusalem as official capital of Israel and to move embassies. What they did, what Arab world they did? Nothing. When Israel decided to announce officially Golan as a part of Israel territory, the annexation of Lebanon, which is Syria, Golan. It was an Arab land. It was against all UN resolutions. And the Israelis, they announced, President Trump supported. And did you see anything from the Arab leaders to do to prevent it? No. Palestinians today, the first complaint Palestinians they have is from the Arab leaders, because they go to establish close relation with Israel, to fight Iran, and to demonize Palestinians.
Ambassador, with due respect, my question is about Shia and Sunni relations. I understand what you're saying itself is a topic, and if we have more time, we can dwell on it. But you moved on from that topic by saying that these need to be a dialogue among theologians. Do you think that dialogue among theologians will avoid masses being in conflict?
No. What I said this should start, the first initiation, serious initiation should start from the religious leaders. But second, we need the dialogue between academics. We need the dialogue between media. We need dialogue between, people to people, nations to nations.
What is the possibility that Iran, which is a Islamic Republic of Iran, declares that using the bad words towards the people, Sahaba, may God be pleased with them, the company of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, should not be allowed. And the Islamic Republic of Pakistan and other countries all join. People respected by Shias should not be abused, and Shias declare the people respected by Sunnis should not be abused. Is there any possibility of something, or am I living in a different world?
No, this is not only a great possibility, but I tell you, you may have not heard, I don't know, but there is a clear fatwa by Ayatollah Khamenei and other grand Shia Ayatollahs that abusing or blaming the Sahaba is haram. This is official religious fatwa of Ayatollah Khamenei, that no Shia can abuse or blame Sahaba of Rasulullah. This is haram. Therefore, as long as the grand Ayatollahs, the Iranian supreme leader, which is a big marja' taqleed, when they say abusing or stating anything, any statement against Sahaba is religiously haram, and they have issued the fatwa, I believe we should create a bigger move between the people, ordinary people, in order to understand that Shia and Sunni, they have to compromise and they have to respect each other's beliefs. And no one can or should abuse or insult the other side.
That is something which God Almighty has told Muslims not to be abusive of the guard of others. So in case in their ignorance, they go around abusing God himself. So let me ask you one last question. It is also a little difficult. You know, the city where you were born in Kashan, just 2.2 kilometers from there, there is a shrine of the killer of Khalifa Umar, and there is a celebration takes place of that day called Jashne Umar Kashi or something like that. Why that thing is allowed?
Actually, this celebration was very much powerful, and each year with attendance of some hundreds, not only from the city, from other cities. But if you go this year, years after revolution, you would see that there is no such a celebration during last decades. I have never seen in Kashan. I mean, fortunately, after issuing such a fatwas, the Kashanis and the others, they have understood this is abusing or insulting to one of the Sahaba, Umar. And there is no celebration anymore over there.
Well, Ambassador, thank you so much. I hope I didn't ask too many hard questions. I just wanted people to understand what is the narrative of Iran, and you have been their diplomat, and you are in the United States. I hope, I heard that Iranian supporting President Biden. How are they supporting?
Iranians, there is no official, document or something that shows Iranians they are supporting. But I was in Iran for 3 months, 4 months. My feeling is that majority of Iranians, they hope Biden would win only because Biden said he would come back to nuclear deal and he would be committed to the UN resolution and he would implement it. That's why the understanding of majority of Iranian is that Mr. Biden would distance itself from President Trump policies, and there would be later after, if the US rejoins the nuclear deal, there would be a possibility for a type of multilateral dialogue between Iran and the world powers, including the US, on the regional issues, which would help peace in this region.
Well, thank you so much, Ambassador Mousavian. Truly appreciate you taking your time, and I wish you good luck. And thank you so much, Sherdil Khan and Dr. Wahid, for producing today's show. You're watching Muslim Network TV on Galaxy 19 satellite, Apple TV, Amazon Fire TV, Roku, and our own website, muslimnetwork.tv. Peace. Salam.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you.
Salam.